will start slowly as the automatic information was quicker than I was. We are recording this event, and I think it's very helpful, as Gabi mentioned earlier, for others who couldn't join to listen into it later when they have time to do so. Since we all understood now that we will be recorded and published, we can start now. I'm Patricia Lorenz. I work for a joint project and Friends of the Earth Europe and so on. And I'm here only to give a short introduction into this topic. We've been following this, of course, all of us, I think, for the past years. And as we know, the biggest problem of nuclear industry was and always, of course, the waste problem, which they couldn't solve. Now they, of course, due to this situation in Sweden and Finland mainly, but also France, they claim that CGU is soon to get a construction license. They are full of optimism. There was an OECD EMEA conference. It was called Conference on Geological Repositories, ICGR, Advancing Geological Repositories from Concept to Operation, April 4th to 8th in Helsinki. Since I didn't travel there, but we decided to even pay the fee to listen and see whether they somehow changed whatever rhetoric, so to speak, or compared to the past years, almost decades. So no, I can say nothing really changed. The sound of this conference is they are constantly extremely positive, mostly congratulating in themselves, discussing about how much to exchanging, learning, celebrating, welcoming, feeling this upward trend. And yeah, they have a little problem because by now they're already retiring, but they're trying to find, of course, younger researchers. And they said this UAT project might bring in some people. The presentations were usually extremely short and again, very, very little content about a whole day. They still know, and this is of course true, it's about trust, transparency, stakeholder involvement. And they still say they don't have technical problems. It's only people and NGOs being nasty. On the conference reporting, it turned out they have no recording. And they don't even have presentations, even after all this high conference fee. But they announced there would be some report they are preparing, and they will come at some point. So once I have it, I will see how much is useful for us, and we will send it to you, and we'll certainly put this in some shape or form, depending on copyright issues, of course, also on our side. I only want to those few things I found interesting to report to you. So it was much these public relations and stakeholder management, what's called usually ladies. So one, she was really excellent, I have to say, as a speaker, Karen Wheeler, the Deputy CEO for Nuclear Waste Services UK. And when they, for example, as you know, they had this big crash in 2014, they say this like this, I love it. 2014, the whole process failed, from which we learned hugely. So that's how you do it. They said they have a so-called consent-based siting process. It's a willing community process. And I think this is the information to all those programs which just don't have it, namely, of course, the Czech one, which we know. So they had to start over. And they said in 2019, they will only build a repository at a specific site and community if there is a consent to host it, which they will ask only at the end of the search process. They don't know exactly, some sort of local referendum at the end. So they understand, of course, this is a high risk for them, but if they fail, they would start over again. I think this sounds really very bold, one has to admit. Currently, I wondered how they're handling it. They have now 3 communities. These communities are receiving already benefits. And 2 are close to Sellafield. And they are the same communities, interestingly enough, which were in a previous and failed process. So they talked them into it again. of course, they said it's a plus that it's so-called global nuclear communities, and they know a lot, and so on. And then they have on the East Coast, they have another community, which is completely new, has nothing to do with nuclear. And she called this community, they are depressed and underinvested. So that's how it works. And the next one I thought interesting was Mrs. Laurie Swamy. She's the president and CEO of the Nuclear Waste Management Organization Canada. And she also went on stakeholder management, trusts, and the whole mumbo jumbo. And then she said, oh yeah, so we have 2 sites now we're working with. They do geological stuff and the usual you would expect. And they're both on native people's territories. I find this, hard to believe, but it's a fact, and they're proud of it. Then came Finland and Sweden, who quickly agreed that nuclear sites are the best. I found this interesting. They was always discussed, but now it seems to be official. And also old news is that, of course, the general high trust in the state in those countries is a key issue for them, why it's possible that they are where now. And I think they are, of course, fully correct on this, that if there is no trust in the state in general, it's very hard to work on projects like this one. Then there was the French representative, I forgot in this minute who he was, the CGO. I might have missed the part, I have to admit, but they are about to hand in the construction application. Then there was from NAGRA someone. They say they don't have a consent-driven process, which is not possible there. It's a government-led process in several steps. Well, they call themselves major project, planning stage, blah, blah, cooperation for the disposal, Switzerland. The Rock will speak soon. I wasn't sure how this is meant. Interesting, in Switzerland, they don't have to make it retrievable, but they have to show that they would have a technical solution to make the waste retrievable if this would be required. Also interesting. And then there was a short report about encapsulation plant, which was already delivered to Olkiluoto. There are installations ready, and they are in the commissioning phase of different systems. Belgium was a report. They are so proud. They've been researching for 40 years, and yeah, that's about it. And they are in clay research. There was a research report from the US on salt. Yeah, this is about it. Why we also chose to discuss this here and offer this webinar is, of course, the situation also with the taxonomy. As we know, we all were, so to speak, yes, very unhappy that after a really long and very tough fight, the complementary delegated act was pushed through. For those who have not been following it very closely, quick review. There was a really scientific process by a so-called technical expert group installed by the European Commission itself. They worked hard and a lot, produced 600 pages of paper, and there they said we could not conclude that nuclear is a sustainable and green energy form, and there is this problem of nuclear waste being unsolved, thus we didn't include it. This, I think, is clear in itself. It's just that the nuclear lobby managed to say, they don't know because they are not real experts. So that's, we know this game. Then they bring in real experts, and this is IEA, OECD, Joint Research Center. I might have forgotten one of those. And they, of course, quickly concluded it's very sustainable even. I leave out a little bit of paper heaps and discussions. It ended up with, on 31st of December, 2 hours before midnight. Sorry, my computer, I have to feed it somehow. They presented this complementary delegated act, and they included nuclear and gas, and ever since the fight is going on. So yeah, and now in the taxonomy, nuclear is included, but also only those nuclear power plants for which there is a final repository where they can prove to the EU Commission, at least on paper, that it will be ready to operate by 2050. And this sounds anyway rather relaxed as usual. It's just some countries found out it's not. The only one where I have to admit we know it, that it's a problem, is the Czech Republic. They said so. They first said they will let the Commission know it's impossible. They have to extend all that. Commission didn't see it that way. So now they're trying to push the program from being ready by 2065 back to 2050. I don't know, perhaps Monica or Edda can report on the current status. I think the last I heard was the ministry, the responsible ministry, saying, yeah, of course they can do that. It will be done by 2050. Therefore, I think it's so important what Gabi will report later, what conditions are there and what has to be taken into account. And we really have to look into this. Very last sentence is, of course, full of hope, because this complementary delegated act is not decided yet. It's already drafted, accepted by EU Commission, and of course the Council, the member states who also wanted it. I mean, the EU Commission, I have to say this point, they didn't want this. They didn't want to have nuclear included. So it's really a member states deed that's here done, bad deeds. And the European Parliament is now discussing it in its committees. And in July, in a plenary vote, with simple majority, they can say yes or no. And there are very realistic chances that they might say no. So, and then this taxonomy discussion, which I think is also part of Gabi's presentation, might be over anyway. And I think now it's even more likely than ever, because why, of course, nuclear and gas is pushed into the taxonomy was the big topic of energy security, as we know. But now, since gas and nuclear are also, as we know, highly dependent from Russia, this last argument also is slowly falling. We have embargoes discussed on all of this. With nuclear, they still avoid it being part of the sixth sanction package of the European Union. But already Germany started demanding uranium and nuclear services being included. France, Germany, so it might still happen. We also produced a report. I would dare say it is interesting because it shows that this is way more than the fuel and it cannot be easily replaced. We put this new report on the Don't Nuclear Taxonomy website, so you can read it there, and it's really rather surprising results how much is in the nuclear cycle if you see it coming from Russia and its companies. I will stop now, and I think we can directly continue with the program. Yes, so we have now Johan Svan from MKG Sweden. He will talk about the safety difficulties. He's been following this, I think, for decades. And is one of the few people, I think, who still has an overview over the extremely important copper canister discussions. Here, I also can only say, I think it was 10 years ago, copper canisters were somehow the silver bullet solution from nuclear industry. When they came up with this, it looked like everything is settled. Also, they overcame this big problem we have that those magic host rocks somehow were not so magic, not even the famous granite. So they said, never mind, we have copper canisters, you can use them anywhere. So it seemed really like the big breakthrough. The rest Johan will explain to us is the Kbs3 method, which was the big hope, but it's really getting difficult in Sweden. And after that, we have Gabriele Mars from Institute of Ecology and the joint project, who will give an overview over the situation. There's also the EU legislation in this field, environmental impact assessments, and public participation options. And then, of course, we're looking forward to your questions. So, Johan, please.
Thank you, Patricia and Gabriele. I would like to actually connect that to what you said, Patricia, just now, with the copper canister being like the king of the KBS method. actually, what is interesting now in the Swedish situation is that it is not there's more focus actually on the other barriers, because the regulator is actually saying that because the other barriers are so good in the Forsmark bedrock, it's not so important about the copper anymore. So it's really changed around in another way again. And what I was saying just then, how the regulator perceives the completeness of the system becomes fundamental. I think you all know that the Swedish government in January decided to approve the KBS method in Forsmark, and we have actually appealed this just recently. Some Swedish NGOs have appealed this, and I will now go through. I'll actually go back a bit and give you the background also, because I think it's important to get the whole picture of this and how it has developed. So I will now share the screen. There we go, and there we go. So now MKG, for those who don't know this, it's an organization that combines a number of Swedish NGOs, the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, Naturskyddsföreningen, which is it's the main biggest NGO in Sweden, with a number of 230,000 members. And they also have the judicial people. They have the environmental lawyers there who makes it possible for us to work so well within the legal system. But some years ago, a couple of years ago now, the Friends of the Earth joined MKG, and then there are a number of members, including the local and regional chapters of the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation in the Östhammar and Uppsala region, Uppsala community, and so basically the KBS method. Of course, most of you know this, the copper canister. And surrounded by a bentonite clay buffer, and then clay in the tunnels and all the way up. I don't know exactly how far up, but it'll be filled with bentonite clay. And of course, the clay is intended to swell with the water inside the tunnels and the deposition holes to become very tight and not let anything move through the tunnels, for example. Now, the method is actually old, and it's called the Kbs3 method because there were a couple of other similar reports. The first one with the titanium canister and reprocessed high-level waste, and the second one with copper and reprocessed high-level waste, and the third one then with direct deposition of the spent fuel in copper canisters. And it's about 500 meters underground. So I've already said this, but the safety case is basically for hundreds of thousands of years. In reality, I think it's 0.6 canisters will be corrupt after 1 million years. That's what if you put the figures into the safety analysis, it's really nothing will happen for 1 million years. I think I have to back up there. Now, the question whether copper is a good choice was debated actually in the 80s already, because there was a researcher who said that there could be problems here because the water could corrode the copper, not only oxygen. And this whole issue surfaced in 2007 and continues until this day. So here are the 3 KBS reports from the late 70s to 83. This is how they look like on the shelves of the MKG office. And of course, during a number of years, reports were produced. And here we have a number of the reports. These are basically, most of these are from 2005 onwards, when MKG was created, was founded. Now, there was an extended licensing consultation process from 2002 to 2010, and MKG joined in 2005. And then there was a submission of the license application in March 2011. The application was reviewed by the regulator, because there were actually two applications, one according to the Nuclear Activities Act, and then the Environmental Court had a special application according to the Environmental Code. And as happened then in January, the final decision had to be taken by the government. But we are in 2011. That's over 10 years ago when the process started. I'm having a bit of a problem moving forwards and backwards, but I will see what I can do. Now, there was a long review for completeness of the application. It was completed in 2015, and then it was a review on issues, and many issues were covered. But the question of the copper corrosion became a very important issue. And there are a number of researchers at the Royal Institute of Technology, KTH in Stockholm, and we supported them to make it easier for them to participate, because we of course we understood the processes and how you had to send in your briefs and so on. So I'm going to. Okay, so here's the license application. The top here, it's a lot of documents, and of course there are more and more documents that are available on the web as sub-documents. MKG and the Swedish Society for Nature, we produced a number of briefs during this time. And in the autumn of 2017, finally, the Environmental Court had its main meeting of the court. Now, here the regulator told the court that there could be some issues with copper corrosion, but these could be dealt with later but I didn't think they were important, and especially this question of the other barriers would also be there, and therefore the robustness of the system was important. But the court questioned this at the meeting already, because they saw that this could not perhaps be according to the environmental code, this kind of thinking. And especially that in the Environmental Act, the repository had to be shown to be safe, and that the knowledge was enough for it to be shown to be safe before a government decision. And of course, in the court, you also had the scientists standing there, and we had even more time, a special day about copper corrosion during this long time. We spent 4 weeks in total over a period of about 1.5 months to discuss all these issues. And also during the proceedings, there were leaks to the media, and they showed that the regulator had internal problems. The corrosion expert of the regulator was against saying yes. And also there were some scenarios that SSM had created itself that showed that the regulatory limits would be exceeded. So here is the team from MKG and the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, and here is one picture of the court. And here is one of the articles about how the problems of SSM, and so we were after we left, of course, there was some idea that perhaps the court could be convinced by this, but I think people were saying maybe 5 to 10% that the court could do something about this, so that they could actually make a recommendation to the government that there would be problems. But what happened was that the court actually did this. They actually recommended that the government say no, because according to the court, there were still uncertainties about the long-term safety of the repository, and due to possible copper cancer problems. And they listed a number of issues about copper corrosion and copper problems that the government had to resolve before they make the decision. But the regulator, of course, said, no, this is okay. we think that the copper canister will be okay. And also, of course, because of the other barriers, the clay and the clay buffer and the rock with the clay tunnels, that they will also be very safe. There should be no problem. And this is important for the understanding of what happens later. And I will say already now that we are quite concerned that the quality of work showing that the clay buffer will work, especially if the copper corrodes, because we think that the clay buffer will basically collapse due to the copper corrosion problems, because the copper will come into the clay and it will not work as intended. But also, it's not really shown that the clay will swell in the tunnels in a way that will be okay, and especially in the Forsmark rock, where there are high rock tensions, and also there is a lot of water pressure in the locality, and it's very possible that we will have water flowing through the tunnels instead after a couple of 100 years, rather than of course the rock itself is very, very tight. So if you put in the value, if you're making it like a multiplication between different factors, because the rock is so tight, it doesn't really matter what you do, because no water will go through the rock, and therefore everything is safe if the rock, if just take into account the rock. And the whole idea that the regulator has, that this means that don't have to be worried about the copper canister. They're actually quite upset that people are talking about the copper canister. But this is important for what happens later now. So this was seen by many Swedes as very surprising, this issue, and of course, but it was for us and for the scientists, it was a big victory. Now the problem with copper, very shortly, the idea behind the KBS method is that when the oxygen is consumed after some months after you have closed the repository, then there should be no corrosion at all. Actually, there is of course some problems with sulfur in the groundwater that can cause very little corrosion, but what these researchers have been saying since the 80s basically is that water in itself corrodes, which means that there is so much available oxygen in the water, as long as the hydrogen is released from the water within the processes, that the copper can actually corrode quite fast and quite deep. And these are pictures here from the FEBEC experiment. We didn't have these pictures when we had the main meeting of the court, but they were coming at around that time in the late 2017, early 2020. And here you see corrosion after about 18 years, and you can see how this copper piece has been corroded. Especially you see down here that it's a pitting corrosion situation. This is about 0.1 of a millimeter deep already after 18 years. So the government then had to do something, and so it did a review, and it asked the SKB to come with a complementary information, and they did this in April 2019. And comments were made by different parties, including the researchers at KTH. SKB said that the repository, the idea the repository was safe, was strengthened by the new information. But the Swedish Council for Nuclear Waste said that there may be problems with copper, and that's quite important, because the council, even though it towards the end did not have that much influence on the government, it is actually the government's advisory board, and they were already at this time saying there could be problems, and they were more and more intense in the criticism as the time went by towards the government decision. Now we're saying that the copper cannot be used as a canister material, and the KTH researchers persevered. And basically what we're saying is that there was not enough new information here. There was not any new information. I mean, they only had a very short time to do this. So they were saying basically that the court is wrong, and the government doesn't need any new information. Now, very shortly, I'm going to say something about something called the LOOT project. Because what happened in 2019, and now we're talking right in the middle of the government review, is that some research packages containing copper and clay were retrieved, and they had 20 years of corrosion in them. Now, the project has been ongoing since around 2000 in the Hard Rock Laboratory at the Oskarshamn nuclear power plant. And there were 7 packages with copper and clay, and it's a very good simulation of the real repository conditions. Now, early on, 3 one-year packages were retrieved, but in 2006, SKB retrieved 1 5-year package, and there was an unexpected amount of copper corrosion. Now, the reporting of this was very weak, especially regarding the copper corrosion, because the SKB claims that actually it's true that the project is mainly to study clay. It's a long-term clay research project, but there is a lot of copper in the experiment. So of course it has an interest. I mean, there's an interest what happens with the copper. Then we demanded for a long time that the next package was to be retrieved, and nothing happened, and nothing happened, and nothing happened. Basically, this is what it looks like. Here you have the packages. They're about 4 meters long, and inside there is a copper tube here, and it's heated at the bottom part here. And then there's the clay around it. And this is about 30 centimeters in diameter, and the copper tube in the middle is like 10 centimeters in diameter. You have it here after taking it out. And there are also these copper coupons in the system here, and they are at this and this level. But here is the heater, and therefore the hottest part of the experiment is down here. And here the temperature can reach about 100 degrees, or even in one of them 140 degrees, because the intention was there to study what happens with clay if it's too hot. Normally this is supposed to be around 100 degrees, the clay in the repository, because that's you don't want actually less than 100 degrees, because you don't want water to be boiling inside the repository. So what happened is that in the autumn of 2019, SKB, they secretly retrieved 2 now 20-year-old packages. There was a meeting, and SKB, by mistake, I think, said that this had been done, we would then work to try to get SKB to disclose all the results, corrosion results, and that SSM would check the result. And actually that happened. This is quite complicated, of course, but we also constantly informed the government what was happening. SKB published the results in October 2020, and SSM then carried out the quality assurance project. So the important thing here is that we think that the results are not scientific, and neither do the scientists at KTH. And the reason for this is the following. Just to make sure that, let's see what we have here. There we go. Here you have a picture of the bottom of the experiment. There is actually a copper plate that's 30 centimeters in diameter, and it's down here, and it's in contact with sand, not clay. But you can see physically, you can see the corrosion that's going on this copper plate. And what we don't see is the corrosion on this part of the copper tube. You have a part of the copper tube up here where it's much colder. It's like maybe 70 degrees or even less. And on this part you have pictures like this, of this type of pictures, where you can see the corrosion in a from the side, and here you can see pitting corrosion here at this part. Now what we wanted to see, of course, is the detailed results of this type of the copper here, where it's hottest, and also of this corrosion here, because there's not supposed to be any corrosion. Basically, we think that this was already from the start, there was no oxygen available to cause any corrosion here. So we think that basically all this corrosion is due to water corroding, which means that should not be the case. So we basically think that if the SKB had published these detailed copper corrosion of the hottest part of the copper tube and the bottom plate, it would be clear that the copper would not work as a canister material. Now, in the end, neither SSM nor the government took this into account. SSM's quality assurance review did not agree. I mean, they just said, well, this is okay. They have done what they should be doing, and so on. So it's really problematic in this case, I think. Now, we're approaching the government decision in 2021 during last year. We had a big political discussion because by this time the opposition parties that are right-wing and liberal, they were pressuring the government to take a decision because they said, well, this is important, we need this repository. But of course, there was a green minority, a social democrat and green minority, and the Green Minister of Environment, he did not want to approve any repository. And we also had a lot of corrosion discussions again in the autumn. And we discussed the loot experiment also. Even the Swedish Council for Nuclear Waste told the government that more research is necessary to understand how the copper canister behaves. And then we had this big political turmoil in the budget process for 2022, and this resulted in the Green Party leaving the government. So there was a new social democratic Minister of the Environment, and in December she promised a decision on the repository on January 27th of this year. And this, of course, happened. The government took a decision to approve the repository. And in the decision, you can see it relies entirely on statement from the regulator that the repository has the conditions to be safe, and especially because there are multiple barriers that assure robustness. So it's a really heavy on the SSM position, and it's not really discussing very much about the environmental court situation or the question of if the environmental code is followed. So this allows us I think, we have quite a good case, I think, in our appeal, or rather it's called a judicial review, because the Swedish Supreme Administrative Court, will only look at whether the government has followed the law, whether it has followed the environmental code in particular. That's what we are asking. And we think that there are big problems here. Now, we strongly question the whole work of SSM basically here, and we say that the way they have dealt with this is not according to the environmental code, and especially the canister is the problem. But we also point to the problems of the clay buffer and the rock and the clay in the tunnels. Now, the SSM actually have to follow the environmental code also in their evaluation according to the Nuclear Activities Act, because that's implemented in the Nuclear Activities Act that they have to follow the environmental code. So we think we made a good appeal. We also raised issues regarding the method and the siting, and also Natura 2000 issues in the appeal. If it is unsuccessful, actually, we think it probably, we give it like a 5% chance to succeed, perhaps. But also remember, we did say that also when we were looking at whether the environmental court would say yes or no to the government, we also said about 5%. But still, it's even though I think we made a good case, and we included a lot of information to the court, it is probably so that they will not give us. And what if that happens anyway? It goes back to the government again. So the government gets it back, the case. We have asked them to actually to dismiss the case, but that's very unlikely. And if we are successful in any way, it goes back to the government. And it might go back to, according to Natura 2000 issues, and then, for example, not copper corrosion issues, and then the government can easily rephrase the decision. Now, when this happens, I don't know. We don't know how long time this will take. But anyway, the SKB has said that they don't want to continue to work with the process until the middle of 2023 anyway. But at that time, the environmental court will continue the process and give the final license decision with the conditions that they think the license should have. And this could take a number of years with appeals, and there are several. There is an upper environmental court also, and so on. But the court is basically bound by the government decision. So I think if everything goes according to what SKB and SSM wants, there could be perhaps a construction in 5 years, operation in 15 years, because construction may take up to 10 years, we think. Now, this compares to the Finnish situation, where they are now actually finishing off the encapsulation plant, and they are hoping to get a license for operation from the government and Stuk, so they can start in 2025, perhaps, in Finland. Also, it's important that we may not have the resources to take part as we have had for these many years. This has been an important point. That the environmental NGOs in Sweden have been resourced since 2005. The regulator cut our funding in 2022, this year, to a level below the funds we have in 2005. So we're having real big problems with the economy this year. And they gave the money to a pro-nuclear group instead that started the eco-modernists have started some work, and they gave part of the money to them and took it from us and from the other NGO Milkas that also is working with this. So in the future now, SSM has a central role because they have a continued stepwise decision making. So they will they will have to take several decisions in the future. But also they are also responsible for the review of the research program that SKB gives out every 3 years. But unless, of course, SSM changes its way of thinking and decides that it's more important to look at the individual barrier systems, then nothing should happen that should make any problem for SKB as we see it. Whether the copy issue will prevail despite the, I think so. I mean, I am a scientist, a scientific background, and I think that the copper, it'll just come back and come back and come back to them, because we really think that copper is really lousy material, and the KTH researchers are saying that the state-of-the-art steel is much better than copper. And then for the final thing, what can happen internationally? I think you will come back to this now, Gabriele, Gabby, and will there be some deep boreholes discussions in the future? Will rolling stewardship prevail in the end? We will see, but we have a lot. We have been working for a long time, and it's just a long time in front of us, even though I may retire in not so short time, so others will have to take over also in Sweden. But so this is basically, I think, what I have to say. MKG website, there is an English part here. I think if you do Google Translate, you will get everything on the Swedish side also. And here you can, for example, see our appeal. Look at our appeal. It's in Swedish, of course, most of it, but it's possible to find it there. So that was what I wanted to say, and I will stop sharing so we can have, I think we have about 50 minutes maybe to questions and discussion.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Johan. for, as usual, excellent presentation of your excellent work. And I say this again, I'm really very worried if you don't have enough funding to continue your work. I mean, in this case, it's really very crucial because it is a complicated matter. And for us, it's important. That's, I think I said before. Before I also use here all my privileges, I would ask you what you could add on the Finnish situation. And I would also add on the future that, as I said, I suffered through this industry OECD conference. And also from other stuff, my impression is they are going heavily for the Deep Geological Repository. Seems to be only thing on their minds. The rolling stewardship and the boreholes a little bit, but rolling stewardship seems to be absolutely out of their minds. Okay, it was a conference on this topic, but still the political and policy seems to be going towards finding a big hole and throwing it all in, and then you're done with it. With Gabi, we made a little addition to one of our studies, because of course, why we look into this? As soon as Finland, as you said, in 2025 might already start, the construction license for the Swedish one might be coming, for CGO as well. So then they say it's all done and that's it. Yeah. So, and the technical issues are already now difficult to argue, as you showed us clearly. So we looked into the costs, and we saw these 5 billion euros that Finland had accumulated and invested now is, of course, a sum most countries don't have now and won't have ever, because they don't even try to go for this. So, as I said, this is also very important argumentation when we have to counter in our countries. When they say, Finland has it, we will have it too, then it would be really recommended to see how they are accumulating money in their national funds, which is very often very, very little. So plus, and here it gets really interesting, we could say, yeah, so, but you have to then increase, of course, the fees per megawatt hour that you're selling from your nuclear power plants, sometimes really a lot, which means the whole business case would just crash even more than it is already. So this question of how much these so-called solutions from Scandinavia are working and can be implemented, or at least used on paper in other countries, I think that's what we really have to look into, with or without the taxonomy coming through with nuclear or not. So Johan, if I may ask quickly on Finland, because we have a very difficult situation, because very little people are working on this in Finland. Even in this conference I listened to, when they were asked how it was to work with the stakeholders and the public in Finland, the Finnish representative said, yeah, we don't have a very active civil society, or meaning like there is no problem whatsoever. So
yes, I mean, the Finnish situation is problematic. There is a different culture in Finland completely compared to Sweden. We talk about two countries that have a lot of trust in the government and in the regulatory systems and so on. But Finland is I think even more exceptional than Sweden. And what I can say is that the Finnish project is very much an industrial project. They are following a plan from 2000, basically, to have a repository operational by the beginning of the 2020s, and they are following that, and they don't care very much about other issues than just how to implement this. So here in Sweden, this is very much an environmental project, but in Finland, it's very much a technical project, and I think that's why they are also advancing quite fast. As a general comment to what you were saying about all these countries with the geological repositories, and they're all doing it at about 500 meters depth, and they're all doing it in a few different some in clay and so on, but still, I think that the one major problem here is actually the intrusion problem of the repositories at these depths. And I think that is actually coming a bit about, we're talking more internationally about how to inform the future about these these repositories, and the understanding it is very, very difficult. So I think that issue could also, it deals into both the boreholes and rolling stewardship, also those discussions. So we will see. But at the moment, of course, there is a momentum for the industry with the Swedish and the Finnish decisions and how it's working here. But this is a long-term fight we're doing. So it's not over until whenever.
Are there any more questions now to Johan before we go to the next presentation? Yeah, Niels, you wanted to say something. Hi.
Hi, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I was just wondering, does in fact the Supreme Administrative Court have the final say in the licensing procedure, or is there a possibility, if deemed necessary, to take this case about the copper canisters into the independent judicial system, so to speak?
No, the higher administrative court is the highest court in Sweden. Basically, it's our Supreme Court, sort of. And it takes cases. Normally, it takes cases of different types from all the different courts, and they can end up in that court. And also very, very special cases end up there. About 2%, I think, of the appeals that are made to that court are actually accepted by the court. But in this case, the government, the court has to take this type of appeals of government decisions. The court has to follow through on them. Now, to what depth they will do this, we don't know. I mean, there are not so many cases of this size that have reached the court, and of this importance, I think, also. But the court basically could say whatever it wants to. But the likelihood is that it will say the government has not done this properly. It has not followed the environmental code, and therefore the government gets it back to do something. Now, the government can then, it needs to do something about the copper issue, certainly, but they don't have those resources. So I would, in that case, it's possible even that they move it back to the environmental court again. And the environmental court, they have more teeth. They can actually get SKB or others to do more research and so on. And so that could be a development. But as I said, the likelihood is probably that the court says, well, we think the government it's a difficult decision, but the government hasn't broken the law, and therefore it's okay. And then we move on into the environmental court again, and it will be the same judge that said no, and he will be very upset. But his hands are locked a bit. But something could be done with the conditions that the court puts on SKB. So there will be an appeal, and we will probably appeal different decisions, but also SKB might actually be appealing decisions of the environmental court regarding the conditions that they have to meet and so on. So, but we're talking about a 5-year period. Hopefully there will be resources. I'm sure that the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation and their lawyers, who are now very, very, very into this case, they will probably be able to follow up, at least, even if there are no resources from the government specifically for MKG. We may have to shut down, but it's possible, of course, that the environmental movement has some funding of its own in Sweden, so they can take this on. So it will not be over completely, even if the resources are gone for that come from the government.
Okay, thank you. Are there more questions before we continue? Okay, we can still come back and ask Johan after, of course, Gabriela's presentation. Yeah, so it's 2 to 3. We are in time, which is great. Gabi, would you please start?
Yes. Can you see the slide? Yeah, okay. So yes, I will give you a short overview of the Deep Geological Repository projects in European Union and especially participation possibilities. And please ignore the dog barking in the background. Yeah, most of you will know, or all of you will know, Nuclear Waste Directive 2011/70 Euratom, that the EU member states, they have obligations to report to the European Commission first, their national nuclear waste management programs, and also second, their progress reports. And this figure has been published in the latest report from the European Commission in 2019. It's based on the reports of the member states, and it shows the planned start of the operation dates for the deep geological repositories for the spent fuel and high-level waste. I hope you can read it, but it's basically a timeline from now or 2018, moving over 100 years into the future. And you can see that Finland, France, and Sweden, they are on the left side, meaning that they have the first dates for start of operation. And you can also see that these dates have already been delayed. These are the gray numbers. Finland is already in the process of issuing an operation license. But on the other hand, you can also see that some nuclear countries are missing altogether, like Belgium, Bulgaria, and also Italy. For Belgium can be placed about here because in the latest environmental impact assessment procedure on the dual reactors lifetime extension, Belgium side said that they are planning to start their DGR in 2080 at the earliest. Yeah, so it's about here. And in addition, some of these countries, they have set their hopes on multinational solutions for the high-level waste. That is especially Slovenia and Croatia, the Netherlands and Italy. And it's not sure if and when such a multinational repository will start. So this is now a short overview of participation procedures for the deep geological repositories on national and transboundary levels, not on the community levels. First, environmental impact assessment and also participation during licensing procedures for final repositories. We haven't seen many of them until now. But Johan also mentioned it for the Finnish DGR Onkalo, an environmental impact assessment was held and a construction license was issued in 2015. And now a consultation is open for the application of the operation license. This is open until September 2022 this year. In Sweden, also an environmental impact assessment took place with a transboundary part. This was in 2016, and very recently, last year, there have been submitted supplementary information on the copper canisters as a part of this transboundary procedure, but only the countries that took part in the transboundary part, that was Germany and Poland, were allowed to participate. Information on the other consultations during the licensing, you can see on Johan's PowerPoint. Important also are the strategic environmental assessments on the national nuclear waste management programs. You might know, or everyone knows here, that such an SEA should have been conducted for every national waste management program, but this has not been the case. And again, if there is sort of substantial change in the national waste management program, like the decision for a method like the Kbs method is, then another or the first SAA should be conducted. Finland in the last year made an update of its national waste management program and started a consultation procedure. And this is a quite new development where the Kbs method pops up. These are environmental impact assessments for MPP new builds and lifetime extensions. Why is that? Because in the respective EIA reports, you also have to include information on the nuclear waste management of the new build or the lifetime extension. And this includes backend management. So in the last years, in at least 2 EIAs, the use of the Kbs method for a future national DGR was announced. And these are the 2 EIA procedures. The first is the one that is ongoing in Slovenia right now for the Krško lifetime extension. In the report, in the EIA report from this year, we are informed that Slovenia and Croatia, they envisage to build a joint DGR, and this is a quote, the Swedish repository concept Kbs3 is envisaged. So in 2 weeks, we will have a public hearing in Austria on this procedure. And it's a possibility to ask questions about the Kbs, how, of course, this is in the far future for Slovenia and Croatia, but nevertheless, it should be discussed. And also we will have bilateral consultations shortly after, where we will also ask questions about it, how they are going to deal with these copper corrosion issues. And the second one is the one in UK from for Sizewell C, new build. In the EIA report from 2020, it's quoted, the radioactive waste management limited disposal concept for high-level radioactive waste and spent fuel is based on the Swedish Kbs3 method. Again, right now, bilateral consultations of the Austrian and the UK side are ongoing, and we will use this possibility to further discuss if they are really planning to use Kbs3 method, and again, how they want to deal with the copper corrosion issues. I mentioned before that right now a consultation in Finland is open for the application of the operation license for Onkolo. It's open until mid of September this year. Here you see the link where you can find the documents. The operation license will be for the period March 24 to the end of the 2070s. And it will not be the last license, because the closure of this facility is envisaged for the late 2120s. And we as joint project, we want to prepare a statement, well, not alone. Of course, we're hoping to do this together with others. And I come back to the figure of my first slide, the timeline for the start of the DGRs, and put a link to the taxonomy debate. In the taxonomy, it's a criterion that only those member states will get money out of taxonomy who have a plan to have an operating high-level waste repository by 2050. So you can see not many countries will be able to fulfill this criterion. Patrizia has said before that, for example, the Czech Republic, which planned to start its operation 2065, is now trying to move it to 2050. I'm not sure if this will be even possible. But important question is how does this plan for DGR until 2050 has to look like? this is not clear yet. It's not clear yet what plan will be accepted as realistic enough by the financing institutions. It is clear that it will need to have detailed steps, and the choice of a method like Kbs3 surely is such a step. By the way, it's not clear yet what will happen if the steps will not be implemented as planned. So concluding a plan for DGR will look far more realistic if a method like Kbs3 is envisaged instead of no method at all, even if it's not proven to be safe enough. So thank you for attention. At this link, you will find the presentations of today and also the recording later on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gabi. Now we see how this is connected to the taxonomy and how severely some countries will try to prove that they are on the right track, unless, of course, the European Parliament stops this whole crazy idea. Then we can go back to discussing only nuclear waste on its own. So are there more questions or statements or perhaps short reports from your countries? Yeah, Marcus, you wanted to say something? And Pete Roche afterwards. Yeah.
Yes, no, thank you. Just the presentation of Johan had a very interesting point on my view, that is that government didn't take into account the results of these slot experiments and decided without taking into account just this really interesting results. And I think that is not only a question of science and corrosion processes, but it's also a question of processes and of error culture. And I think it's unacceptable that government takes decisions without without including the whole knowledge available on this question. And I would recommend very strongly to protest on that and to verlangen, to say you must install error and safety culture that is part of a safety culture, that a process cannot be overgone, and that you cannot decide as you want and to say that is a good result, that is not a good result. You have to begründen, you have to
Argue?
Pardon?
Argue?
Is argue begründen? Huh? Yes. Yeah, begründen. You have to show that you did take into account these results, you discussed it scientifically, and then afterwards, if a government says, yes, we had done this work, it is published in this and this report, then okay, but it's not acceptable. And that is a play that is in all governments. I know that very well here, also from Switzerland, but also from Germany, that they don't care about if a result is not for them in the green spectrum, they dismiss it. And I think that is basic question of agriculture, and I think we should develop this matter. Yeah, excuse me, my English.
Pete,
Yes.
yes, hi.
Hi. I was interested to see that Gabriella mentioned the environmental impact assessment report for Sizewell C had talked about Kbs3 being the method used in the UK. Whenever I ask them about research that Johan tells us about on copper corrosion, they always dismiss it by saying, oh, we haven't decided what we're going to use yet. So that's their position. That's the way they get around having to discuss the copper corrosion issue in Sweden. And I think, although they haven't announced it yet, they will probably announce a delay to the projects in the UK soon, and it will be the 2050s rather than the 2040s when they expect to start accepting waste. Perhaps they don't care anymore about the EU Taxonomy situation since we've Brexited.
Yeah, Johan?
Yes, Pete, this observation, I've seen this also, I think, in the Czech Republic, that one talks about using other materials than copper in the KBS method. But if we go back to the start of the Swedish safety case, no other material would work than copper to start with. This is not really true, because if the buffer and the tunnels, the clay in the tunnels rock, if they are so very, very safe as they are in the safety case also often, then steel will work. And actually this was pointed out by a researcher, a professor in the US, working for SSM in their analysis. He pointed out this, that also if the buffer works so well, and if the rock is so tight and the tunnels are so tight, then why are we talking about copper? Because then steel would work. But in the Swedish safety case, at least, it's difficult to show that steel or titanium has been discussed also, but that any material could be used. But of course, if we look at the consequences of leakages, we are still talking about the copper corroding over the first hundreds of years, and then it will be, the canisters will start to break apart, basically, also by physical pressures on them. But then for the radioactivity to reach the surface, it will take another 100 years perhaps, or something like this. So we're talking about a 300-400 year process for radioactivity to come up to the surface. And by that time, it's almost all internal radiation discussions, because the isotopes that will come up will be such that you have to drink the water, or you have to eat food or berries or whatever from the area, and that will give, if nothing is done, basically there will be a higher incidence of cancer in the area. And I think this also, is something that makes it easier for the people working at SKB or SSM to take a decision, maybe even the government, even though I don't know if they've thought about it on this level. But the consequences are not worse than having a new Fukushima zone or a new Chernobyl zone in Sweden in 1,000 years. Now, what we're saying is but it's stupid to plan for that. That this is not something we should decide to do. But for them, and I think for many pro-nuclear people, they say, well, radiation is, it's not so. So the concern over what material to use and so on. It's very complicated, the whole discussion of canister materials and so on. And that's why I think that's why we have been working in Sweden from the environmental movements part for a long time, for example, on the use of deep boreholes instead, which both could be environmentally safer and also has less problems of the intrusion problems I was talking about, which I think are very, very serious. That over time scales, these long time scales, that people will actually go down into these repositories. It's a much bigger, let's say, if the safety gate works perfectly, there's only 0.6 canisters breaking up in a million years, then the problems of intrusion are much more bigger than that issue. And now then, of course, then we're now saying that, well, all canisters will be gone by 300-400 years, and so that's also another issue. But I will stop there.
I don't see any hands raised, I think. Are there more questions or points to discuss? Because then I would have a question actually to what you said. I mean, how is this discussion going when you say exactly, you said 300 to 400 years, there might be no canisters left. I mean, how did you arrive at this figure? Is there someone who supports this view? How is this going, this discussion?
Well, this is what these researchers are saying. I mean, they are looking at what happens in down. I mean, what we're seeing in the LUT experiment, and also I think in the FEBEX experiment, is that there is quite a large amount of corrosion taking place that should not be there at all to start with. So you are looking at the same type of corrosion that takes place on a copper roof, for example. And you know that copper roofs, I mean, we use copper on roofs because it's quite a good material, but it doesn't last so many hundreds of years before you start to have leakages in them. Now, think of copper roofs at a temperature of 100 degrees. Now, that will not last 100 years. It will go very fast. They will disappear very fast. Now, this is what we have done in the repository. So what these researchers are saying is that what happens is that you have pitting corrosion going on, which means like in the car, you have, when you start to get corrosion in one part of the car, it will go through the hole in that part, while the other parts are okay. The same thing for the canister. Once you start to get pitting corrosion, that will where it will go through. And then also there's a buildup of hydrogen from that corrosion with water in the copper itself, which causes brittleness and also other types of something called stress corrosion inside the canister. And so you will have, because you also will have the copper canister itself is heavy. There will be a pressure at the bottom, and that's also where the water will be first coming into these deposition holes in Forsmark. So there will be a collapse basically of the copper canister downwards, and then there will be leakage out of the canister. But it's very difficult to say exactly how this will happen. But we are having, I mean, these are very eminent. I mean, it's both the ongoing professor of copper corrosion, who's actually now doing more copper corrosion research, which the SSM is ignoring also, and the government is ignoring. But the previous professor, Professor Legraff, he is a world-renowned professor in corrosion. So for us not to raise these issues with these very, very eminent scientists giving us support, how could we avoid that? I mean, we have to continue all the way in the Swedish case, and we will continue after, even if there's a problem, we don't get the court will not agree with us now in our appeal. Personally, as a scientist, the copper corrosion issue will not go away. I think it will be enough, basically, if some country in the world that wants to use the KBS method actually does some good research on copper, because SKB and the Canadians and the Finnish, it's not really there. I mean, the focus really on and it is possible that SKB will do it in Sweden, because the government in its decision really said that we cannot stop researching now. We have to continue research, but because SSM and SKB have this similar agenda that they want the repository to be built, it's a systemic failure, I think, in the Swedish case that we have at the moment, and perhaps the regulator will actually improve its position and take these issues very much more seriously. But from the experience of the last 5-6 years from the regulator, we are very, very disappointed by their work.
A question now that, sorry, Pete, is a little, if now in this method, Sweden approves the copper canisters, and I mentioned other countries, they would simply then say, oh, in Sweden it's okay, so we don't have to relicense and we just accept these results. I don't know, how would it be? I saw that Nadia Železnik was with us. She worked, I think, with the Nuclear Waste Authority in Slovenia. Perhaps, is she still here? She could tell us how this...
No, Nadia already.
Right now. Now I see. That's a pity, of course.
Yeah, Nadia left.
That's an interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah, and the answer is no. I mean, because the bedrock is different in each case, but the safety case has to be done everywhere for that locality. But the problem with the safety case is that it's quite simplistic in the way that you put in one single figure saying that the rock is tight, and you don't really, and even if there's more water in the rock than you have in Forsmark. I mean, for example, in the Olkiluoto case, you have more water, much more water in the rock, but still these components, the rock, the swelling clay of the buffer, they are all, if you put a high value to their let's say resistance, simplify the resistance, in the safety analysis, it'll come out okay. It'll come out below these regulatory limits, because this is, of course, the problem. What SSM is leaning upon, that you can even show that if all the canisters have a small hole in them, as long as the buffer and the rock are nice, then it'll be okay, or almost okay at least. But my point is that the answer is that yes, they all have to do their own safety analysis because they have different rocks and different so on. But it's probably easy for them to get a good result, because you have these barriers can in themselves, each one of them can be given a value so high that it gives you the safety when you multiply these different figures to get how much is released.
Yeah, but still, I would understand they would take over the safety, so the release data and other characteristics for the copper canisters from the Swedish licensing authorities, and
the Finnish one. I mean, the Finns are now actually selling the Finnish repository concept, because they are first, so they are selling it all over already for CBIS.
Okay. So this I would have thought they take over these results without rechecking all the copper issues that you mentioned, and the rock, of course, they have to do their own. That's somehow logical, but still, if we at least, I'm already thinking as more politically, if we at least are able to show that there is, of course, all these problems that you are following, that perhaps someone might be more forced at least to reduce some of this, to do these material checks.
I think so. And I think, for example, if China, or if South Korea, or if Japan, or even if I think the US already knows the copper is not working. I think there is actually enough research done on copper in the US labs to say that there is a problem with copper, but they, of course, nobody wants to rock the boat, and the whole scientific field of publication and so on in the copper field, it's very, very, very the peer review process and so on. It's very tough, and there's a big fight going on all the time about new results being published. So it's a difficult situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but at least there is some attention to it when I listen to that's important, of course. We have 2 more minutes. I think, Pete, you still have a question.
I just wondered, Johan mentioned 2 professors, Laidroff, I think was one of them, but I didn't catch the name of the other one. And also wanted to ask if there was any work published on some of the clay, bentonite clay issues that he was talking about.
Yes, Jinshan Pan is the present professor of corrosion science at KTH. You can go for kth.se, and you can find him there. And they're doing very good new work using very, very high tech, and they're using accelerator systems in Germany, for example, to study much more in detail what is happening to copper, which has never been done. I mean, it's really stupid that SKB has no interest in researching it, so it has to be done by others. The clay, problem with the clay is that all the research almost in Sweden is done by a company called Clay Technology, which is very, very, it's almost like a daughter company to SKB. So, and they have tried to do some full-scale tests of clay in like a simulated tunnel, and they are doing a lot of buffer tests, and also at the SB Hardock laboratory there's a lot of studies where they have a prototype repository also with like a full-scale long-term. But I mean, the SKB website, if you look there in the publications part, there are enormous amounts of clay studies, but they're all done by this company, which makes it problematic in the sense that not that I think that the research is wrong, but like in the copper, they don't do research on problems. They don't research problems. They just do research things that give positive results that SKB believes in, basically. This is the kind of unfortunately, the collapse of the scientific integrity of the Swedish system is such. I think even the Finns have not done much research with clay yet. So it's all done in Sweden, and it's all done within a very closed scientific field with reporting. I get all these reports sent to me continually from SKB with clay, and I open them up, and there is nothing interesting in them, basically. So it's difficult to I mean, there are no critical clay reports. I can say this, we're running over, but
no problem. Everyone who wants to go can go.
Yeah, the LOTE experiment, the report that came out in 2006 after 5 years, where there was a lot of problems with the copper, more corrosion of copper than originally thought. There were also strong rumors going around in the Swedish scientific areas. I was just getting into the field at that time, that there were big problems with the clay also in the LOTE experiment, and we now the report of the LOTE from that LOTE thing didn't say any problems, but now we have the 20-year packages where, of course, SKB now is doing a lot of the clay technology. This company is doing all the research on the clay. So if there are problems, we won't see them. They won't come out. They won't come out of the Swedish system because it's very tight. There will be reports coming out, but I'm sorry, we cannot trust them, unfortunately. I mean, if there are problems in a LOTE experiment with the clay, nobody will find out. There's no SSM could perhaps try to do reviews and so on, but unless SSM has an interest, nobody will find out if there are problems with the clay with the buffer systems. And the big tunnels, those big tunnels, I think there are more different countries that might be doing work on that, trying to simulate the tunnels, because filling clay in tunnels is not only a KBS method thing, it comes with the French or others also. But we have not seen any results reporting any great success, at least in these how to seal tunnels.
Okay, so I think we're closing now. Marcus, you still have a question, and then I would peacefully finish this here.
Johan, could you prove that the process is manipulated? That would be a good thing if you could write an article on the way as scientific evidence is treated, and how scientific evidence is pushed on the side, this type of scientific evidence that doesn't fit with the governments or with Kbs attempts. And I think that is that what I meant before, that we should focus much more on this type of processes of epistemology, and not only to discuss the copper issue. It's important to discuss the copper issue, but it's not, on my view, it's not enough. We have to go to the governance problems. And I try yesterday, I think you heard my presentation. I think these questions should be in the front of the discussion today, because governments, they and all these institutions doesn't want to hear what they don't want to hear. And that is a big, big problem.
Yes, there was a scandal actually, it's almost 10 years now, where it was shown clearly that SKB had manipulated an SKB report. It was a regulator. The regulator has done some reviews of the quality of the research, of copper research of SKB, and in the second one they found a clear example of SKB manipulating a report, because they asked for the original report from the consultant, and they could see that they had removed some data. Now that data was not it was faulty data that they removed. So they removed data that did not fit, because there was probably a mistake in that part of the experiment. But you're not allowed to do that. You have to include all data. And at that time also, there was then in the final report of SSM that or it was in the final reporting phase at least, that SKB went out and the research manager said, well, we only publish results that we believe in. And I think this is very true. This is very true. Or they only start research projects that can give results that they will be able to believe in. But it's extremely difficult to prove this in any way. It's especially for somebody outside the system, as we don't have those tools to go in and do that work that is necessary, because it's a system that has been built up over a period of 40 years. So it is quite robust, the system that they have for the research. I can say that the people who created clay technology, they are very, very wealthy people at this time, because they have the profits of working for SKB, and basically they only work for SKB. This company has been such that if you think of it as being a there is actually, I mean, it could be called corruption in this case, because they have such big, I mean, they have 20 people who are only working for SKB, and they rake in profits each year. The owners, only a couple, 3 or 4 of them in the company, but still, it's very problematic. And you can yell that it's corruption, but you cannot prove it in any way, I think. But you are right that it's important to try to show that there are problems with the system, and that, I mean, those kind of problems certainly do exist. And if you talk to the people who do the copper research, let's say at KTH, they are, and also others, there are people in Germany who had problems publishing results because SKB has been challenging. I mean, there has been a number of people doing copper research and coming up with results that go against SKB, and SKB attacks immediately, and there's an exchange of information, but nobody has given SKB right so far in those kind of exchanges. I can give you a number of examples of this, where publications have been saying that there could be a problem with copper, and then there is this exchange forwards and backwards about an SKB, and then so it's a very difficult field, the whole copper corrosion field. It's very small, and I really wish that more people would be doing this kind of research. That's the only way I think that things will move forward, if more research is being done. Hopefully it can be done in Sweden, but by whom in Sweden? SKB, why should they do research that shows that they are wrong? That the system is problematic in that sense also, because responsibility is for the implementer often to show that they are wrong. Why should they do research that shows that they are wrong? It's good. Thank God it's Friday now, so we can do something else.
Yeah, but still, last question. This thing of peer review and so on in science and research, just a rumor, or? No,
of course not. And of course not. But the stronger the stronger the forces behind that, the interest, the stronger the interest, the more difficult is it for science to work properly. That's certainly true. And because of the very, very strong forces that are in the field of radiative waste management, there can certainly be more problems there than in other fields. But we have all the problems we had with climate change, or with smoking, or this is in a way it's a bit similar, but because it's so small in a sense still, it's difficult. Not many people are interested in doing good, let's say, meta studies of the science of copper corrosion, or meta studies of the science of radiative waste management. But there should be more of that.
Yeah, there seems to be a general problem with research that since of course the funding also has to come from outside, from universities, so there is definitely more research into how things could work. And of course the more critical part, the peer review part, the problem part, is not financed, and this disappears. So I mean, this is a trend we're seeing in many places. So thank you very much. I think it was a really very interesting discussions. And yeah, and from now on, as you all, thank God it's Friday. So there is other topics now for Friday and Saturday and Sunday. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Bye.
Thanks, Johan and Patricia.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Gabi. Bye.